Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Fortcast, the official podcast of Fort Healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Anderson, ENT surgeon, and serving as president and CEO of Fort Healthcare. And I'm very excited today. Our topic is sun safety, and we have our renowned dermatologist with us today, Dr. Bob Glinert. Dr. Glinert, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Fortcast. I would love it if you could introduce yourself to our listeners. I always say I've been with Fort Healthcare a little over 20 years. So if you can just let us know how long you've been in practice, how long you've been in Fort Healthcare, that'd be great.
I joined Fort Healthcare in 2006, I believe, and have enjoyed it ever since then. I'm a dermatologist and dermatologic surgeon, and I work with another wonderful dermatologist, Dr. Marty Oken.
Well, thank you for that. And full disclosure, Dr. Glinert is also my dermatologist. So I don't know whether to call him doctor or professor because I always learn so much from him whenever I talk to him and spend some time. So it's a real pleasure to have you on today's episode. So Dr. Glinert, sun safety, obviously it's a huge topic. It's very important. From my standpoint, I would love to just start the conversation with just why should people pay attention to their sun exposure, especially as we roll into the sunny months here in Wisconsin?
Very timely question. The sun has many healthful benefits, but too much sun can lead to all kinds of skin cancers. Too much sun can lead to blotchy pigmentation of the skin. It can age the skin. So it's a double-edged sword. But now is the time to know what to do to be safe and still enjoy life outdoors.
So leading into that, we'll get to some of the ill effects of the sun, but let's just start with prevention, Dr. Glinert. So what are some of the things that people can do to prevent the detrimental effects of sun exposure day to day? What are some things they could do?
The most important thing is to know when the sun rays are the most dangerous. Certainly when your shadow is shorter than you are, that's a good guide that the sun is directly overhead and the wavelengths are more intense. Similarly, if you're in a place where the altitude is high or if you're near reflected light, for example, from water or outdoors, all those things can amplify the amount of sun exposure that a person is getting. The first line of defense is just avoiding the peak sun. The second line of defense, I think, is sun protective clothing, covering up, starting with a hat. Sunglasses are good protection, clothing, gloves, dress like a dermatologist, basically.
That's great advice. And I got to tell you, as I get older, when I go to Florida for spring break and people tell me, you're not very tan, I take that as a win. When I was in my earlier days of life, that was not the intent. But certainly now, if I come back and people tell me I don't have a tan, I view that as a compliment. What about sunscreen, Dr. Glinert? What advice would you give those on sunscreen?
The sunscreens are, in my opinion, still very valuable. And for most days in Wisconsin, it's helpful to at least use an SPF 30 or even a SPF higher, up to 50 or 60. There's a lot of things happening in the world of sunscreens. It used to be, when I was a kid, sunscreens were to block the burning waves and let the tanning waves in. The burning waves are ultraviolet B, and the SPF number that you would see on the label of a container would mostly refer to ultraviolet B protection. Now they've incorporated ultraviolet A in the SPF rating as well. And so sunscreens are very important in my opinion. There's two broad categories of sunscreen. The physical blockers, which just physically block the UV from getting to the skin. You'll probably remember the old Lifeguard zinc oxide white paste, and more recently titanium dioxide, which is smaller particle size, isn't as whitening, is another good physical blocker. The nice thing about the physical blockers is that there are no concerns about the chemicals in them at all, and it's almost unheard of to see allergic reactions to the physical blockers. The disadvantage is they are a little thicker and more pasty on your skin, and if you're in water or anything like that, it has to be reapplied quite regularly. But that's probably true for the chemical blockers also. The chemical blockers work by being chemicals that absorb the ultraviolet radiation. And these work very well. They are somewhat easier to apply and they stay on a little bit better. They are somewhat controversial lately. So there are some controversies about how much of the chemicals are absorbed. That question has been raised, but I haven't seen anything that suggests that even if some of it is absorbed, that the chemicals are really harmful. I think the trade-offs are in favor of using any sunscreen is better than no sunscreen.
So it sounds like there's chemical blockers and non-chemical blockers, but they're all considered sunscreen. So is that something that's on the label in case somebody was checking for that? Is that something you can easily find on a sunscreen label?
I think you should. I wouldn't say you can easily do so. I think it's easier just to remember that there are only two physical blockers, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. But it should say that now, to make the topic even more exciting, in Europe they have several new UV filters, and people have been eagerly awaiting for our Food and Drug Administration to approve some of these newer filters, which are said to be better. But our FDA is wanting a lot of toxicology work to be done before approving these new agents, but they're coming, I'm pretty sure.
Well, we certainly look forward to that. And I think the take home message is try to block the sun. Physical clothing, hats, glasses, sunscreen. Be aware of reflective surfaces such as water, and whether that's pool, lakes, streams, oceans. Be aware that that sun is bouncing off of those reflective surfaces and onto your skin. So thank you for that. So Dr. Glinert, when people do get too much sun exposure, obviously in my specialty, we get a lot of referrals, as I'm sure you get 10x what we get, maybe even 20 times the number of referrals we get for concerning areas on the skin. So when you have a patient that comes in and says, "Hi, Dr. Glinert, I'd like you to check this on my shoulder or my back or my face," what's your usual thought process? And talk to us a little bit about the damage that sun can create and how that manifests in somebody's skin when they present to you in the clinic.
Sure. And I meant to say earlier that another good thing to remember is that ultraviolet A goes right through window glass. So it's easy to think that you're safe indoors. But if you're near a window, the window glass does a fairly good job of blocking UVB, but not such a good job of blocking UVA. And the UVA are the longer wavelengths, and they're more apt to not only be carcinogenic, but also to make your skin age faster. So now getting back to your question, what do we look for? We can often see a pattern of chronic sun damage on the skin, and it's not unusual in those fields of sun damage to pick up different types of skin cancer. The one that is feared the most is the melanoma. This typically appears as a mole that wasn't there before. There's something called the ugly duckling sign, and that means if you have one spot that looks different than all your other spots, that's a red flag to at least look for melanoma or other skin cancers. Any spot that won't heal, that bleeds easily, that's irregular, those all warrant a careful exam.
So when you see that patient, they're concerned about a spot and you're counseling them on this, when do you decide to biopsy a spot, basically? When do you say, hey, we should really biopsy this and really check it out?
If there's a reasonable chance that we're looking at a cancer, particularly if there's even a small chance that it could be a melanoma, it's a lot safer and easier just to do the biopsy. We try to be good stewards of the healthcare dollar, and so we don't biopsy everything. And there are lower grade cancers like basal cells that double in size every year. So sometimes we'll say if that's still there in 6 to 12 weeks, then we'll biopsy it. But some of these just go away on their own. And then we can save some healthcare expenditures by watchful waiting. We have a saying in dermatology that a picture's worth 1,000 dermatologists. So we take a lot of photos, and that can be very helpful in deciding if something's new or changed.
You do a great job of taking photos. I believe you have a photo booth in your office, do you not? Or a photo site?
Yes.
Yes. And it's very helpful. Sometimes in ENT, we often have the patient that, being in a rural community, is the longtime farmer and they always have spots on the top of their ears. And it's usually one of two. If it is a cancerous lesion, due to prolonged sun exposure, it'll either be basal cell or squamous cell. I want to highlight on something you said in that biopsies are in the office. They are point of care in the office, walk in and get it done. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you don't have to necessarily go to the operating room to get a biopsy done.
Right. Almost never do we go to the operating room.
So, Dr. Glinert, where are the most common areas that you would see suspicious spots on someone due to sun exposure? Are there some areas that you think are more at risk than others?
In general, it parallels what is getting the most sun exposure for the basal and squamous cells for sure. So the face, the top of the ears, if you have a bald top of the head, the arms and legs frequently get a lot of sunlight. Then melanoma seems a little bit different than the other skin cancers. In men, melanomas are most common on the back, and in women, it's the back of the legs. And the prevailing thought is that intermittent, intense sun may precipitate those melanomas to arise, the so called weekend warrior effect. But you can easily get melanoma where there even wasn't any sun. And so sometimes you'll see a spot and you'll light up, and the patient will say, "Oh, don't worry, that area's never gotten the sun." And you can definitely get melanoma without the sun. There's more to it than just sunlight with that skin cancer.
Melanoma is, as I like to call it, the scary one. Basal cells and squamous cells, where we can deal with them fairly well, but melanoma is the scary one. And getting to your comment on how in males it's on the back and in females the highest likely spot is behind the legs, that the commonality of those is you can't check them every day. How do you check your own back? And even looking at the back of your legs, that's not easy to do either, especially as we age. And sometimes we don't carry that flexibility that we once had when we were younger. What would you recommend, Dr. Glinert, if somebody is concerned about their sun exposure over their course of their life and they come in and see you? Do you then do follow up visits at any particular time intervals?
Sure, if they're concerned, we'll often see them back at least the first time relatively soon, like in 6 months, and often get on a once a year schedule if they have significant background sun damage. We also encourage spouses to get in the habit of checking each other, and we go over what to look for. And so it is, as you say, hard to check your own skin, but if you've got someone handy at home that can help you check, that can be quite helpful.
Well, that's very important. So we're always on the lookout for those skin cancers. And then, of course, just the natural aging process. If you could comment on how the sun, how does it accelerate the aging process from a skin standpoint, Dr. Glinert?
Well, the sun will break up the elastic fibers in your skin, and with those disrupted elastic fibers, your skin is a little more saggy. You can look at me and you, you can see who's older here. So your skin gets more elastic, but the elastic doesn't recoil as well as in a younger person's skin or a person's skin. The other thing that we didn't really talk about is smoking. Smoking plus too much sun really can contribute to the aging process. Another new aspect of sunscreens is visible light. For most of my career, all the emphasis has been on ultraviolet light and aging and skin cancer, but visible light may also be important, and certainly in making your skin more blotchy and also in aging of the skin. And the new generation of sunblocks will also block visible light. You can currently get sunscreens with minerals in there that are said to block visible light also.
So the visible light effects, is that kind of emerging? Would you define that as emerging? So over the course of the next 10 years, we'll probably have more information on that.
Yeah, I think it's happening even faster than that. I'd say within 5 years. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be something on the bottle. I think they're going to move beyond the SPF label into something a little more all encompassing.
We're starting to see it. I think my wife informs me in her makeup products, they will advertise sunblock or sunblock effects. And I'm sure they'll definitely be integrated into that.
Yes, no, makeup is great for that because it's something that you do every day. Not me personally, but a lot of people put makeup on every day and you don't have to think about it. It's like built into the routine. And that's sort of how sunscreen should be.
Well, Dr. Glenner, I've learned a lot today on this episode of the Fortcast. Thank you so much for being part of it today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'd like to say thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Forecast, please see our entire library on the Fort Healthcare website, and please share it on your social channels. Other than that, thanks again to Dr. Glinert, and everyone have a great day. So long.